Welcome, everybody. It's a thrill for me to be here with Eve. This was set up through the School of the Art Institute. So when I was asked if I would be in conversation with Eve, I immediately said yes. And what's exciting about this talk is I'm going to learn a lot about some new work that Eve is doing. We're familiar with a lot of work, and I'm going to start out with just a quote in which, kind of frames some of the early work, particularly the three works that rotate around painting, so forth. So you're going to have to indulge me on that, and then you're going to take us into some new work. So Eve Sussman literally gets into works of art, not content to look. She has to appropriate and penetrate the history of art to the great pleasure of the rest of us, the viewers. The history of art takes on a new dimension with Sussman. The past is aroused from its centuries of sleep and becomes living tableaus that make us look with more than ordinary interest at the work of the great masters. So Eve has moved quite a ways away from these three works that we're very familiar with, those being 89 Seconds at Alcazar from 2004, which is a 10-minute single-channel high-def surround sound video, right, which played at the Whitney for quite some time. I remember sitting there for a long time, days on end. It was
it's true,
amazing.
It was there.
Right. But The Sabine Woman, a film from 2005. Is that
more
right?
like, yeah, well, actually, it premiered very first in 2006 and then was touring really 2007.
Right, which is an 83-minute film.
Experimental feature, yeah.
Right. And then some work that you'll be talking about, White on White, which is an algorithmic noir. So we'll talk about that. And I want to talk a little bit about, just mention something which I quite like. In terms of editing White on White, it was edited through this thing that you're calling the serendipity machine, where you say, we start the computer before the audience enters, and it is always ordered in a different way. So there's no beginning, middle, or end. It runs forever. So I believe that Eve is going to talk a little bit about White on White. Just as a bit of a background, Eve Sussman and her for-profit production company, the Rufus Corporation, is based in Brooklyn, New York. She was born in Britain, and she was educated at Robert College in Istanbul, the University at Canterbury, and Bennington College, Vermont. Just as a note, her first solo exhibition was in 1997 at Bronwyn Keenan Gallery, which was in Soho. And I recall seeing that. It was the surveillance cameras with the pigeons.
Oh, that's very nice. That's great.
It seems like a long time ago.
Right.
Eve told me that she wanted to talk about collaboration because she's collaborating not only through the Rufus Corporation, but through other projects right now.
Well, with Simon Lee, who's in the audience. And with a couple of people that I'm going to introduce today that you may not have heard of.
Right, but and before we jump into that, I just want to, I asked Eve if I could read these, I guess they're 8 tenets. We'll call them
I asked her not to, but she insisted.
I insist, in terms of what the Rufus Corporation is, or is not, perhaps. Number 1, the Rufus Corporation is a 10-year-old boy. 2, Rufus has always wondered about what goes on at think tanks. 3, Rufus is a corporation registered in the state of New York. 4, Rufus has considered becoming a non-profit organization, but hasn't done that. 5, that doesn't mean you can't send Rufus money. 6, Rufus has worked with nonprofits and for-profit organizations and is grateful to them all. 7, Rufus is an itinerant. 8, Rufus isn't sure what Rufus is, but feel free to ask. The answer is always different. So you'll elaborate for us.
Sure. Well, Rufus is a group of people. It's a name. It's a way of talking about things that are outside of myself, because a lot of the work I've made over a long time isn't made alone. They are collaborations. They're made with a lot of people, anywhere from 2 or 3 people to 100 people or more. In the Rape of the Sabine Women, there was one day where we had about 500 extras. And so there had to be a way of acknowledging that. I had also had worked quite a bit with dancers and theater people and choreographers, and you start to get really enamored with the idea of a company. And so I had worked for a while for a dance company in Berlin. And I thought, oh, this is kind of cool. I want to have a company. Why don't we have companies in the art world? You know, theater groups have companies, dancers have companies. Let's have a company. And it's a little bit be careful what you wish for. You know, you're not really sure you want to. Once you say you have a company, you kind of have one. And then you have some responsibilities to that company. But it also was about appropriating the power of the idea of the corporation and the semantics of that. When you get on the phone and you're just ordering materials, say you need to order up some steel or something, the first thing they do is they say, what company are you calling from? And if you're calling from a company, you get treated very differently than if you're not calling from a company, especially if you're female. So let's have a company and let's give it a boy's name. It was amazing, the reaction people have when you suddenly are a company and you're the CEO or you're the director or you're the owner or the president of that company. And so it was partly to acknowledge that these pieces are made with a lot of people, not just me. And it was partly about usurping the power that is available to us when we take over those kind of semantics. But then there was this company, and there are a number of people that since about 2003, I've been, almost 10 years now, I've been working with a kind of a core group of people. And like I say, it's always in flux, it's ad hoc, there are people that go in and out. But one of those people is Jeff Wood, who's in this picture, a great actor and writer as well, who has been collaborating with me on and off since 89 Seconds at Alcazar. He played Philip the King in 89 Seconds. He played one of the G-men, the sort of pseudo-Romans in Rape of the Sabine Women. And he played a character called Mr. Holtz in White on White, Algorithmic Noir. There you see him actually in an installation that we built for the film called Yuri's Office, where we recreated a section of the office of Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, based on a photograph that I shot in Star City. And so part of what I've done over the years is work from pictures that already exist. So 89 Seconds obviously was based on a Velázquez painting. The picture existed. Rape of the Sabine Women was based mostly on the myth, but inspired by a number of paintings of the myth, including the David. And so in that case, we didn't recreate the picture, but we were inspired by that to go back to the myth. And in the case of White on White, again, of course, we didn't recreate the white square on a white ground, but we started looking at the writings of Malevich. They had a lot to do with space. Malevich called himself the chairman of space, the commissar of space. And so we started taking that literally and said, well, maybe we should look into things about space, which meant a research trip to Star City outside of Moscow, where we saw Gagarin's office. And of all of the things that you see in Star City, the centrifuge and the tanks and all the stuff that the cosmonauts and astronauts from all over the world used to train, I was most enamored with the office of Gagarin because it's been kept the same since the day he died. And so with a number of people collaborating, we recreated that office. And so what you see in the poster for the film is a section of the office and we didn't recreate the office, we recreated the photograph. So this is again a picture recreating what is in a picture that existed. In this case, it wasn't a famous painting, it was a picture that I shot, a snapshot that I made. And based on that photograph, we recreated the snapshot as a real three-dimensional space, an installation which has also toured. So the room now has toured to Vienna, toured down to Texas, been shown in New York. It's going to get shown in Montreal next year. But what I'm going to try to do today, it's not perfect, but I'm going to try to excerpt for you a little bit of White on White. The piece is algorithmic, which means it isn't random. It runs with a set of rules. It runs on a piece of software that was written by a guy named Jeff Garneau, a very young programmer, 22-year-old hotshot, who created an algorithm for Kevin and I to sort of rethink about editing. And when you start working on things that are kind of like movies, you start contending with what it means to edit, what it means to put two things together, and the synthesis, what synthesis you get and how powerful or not they are. And so what I found most interesting is often the most exciting edits happened by mistake. And Kevin, who I think is a great editor, and I think I'm not a bad editor, but he agreed, you know, that there is an element of serendipity in anything like that. And so we sort of both talked about, well, what if we could create this serendipity machine that would give us more luck than we could ever have in real life? What if we could generate a machine that could make us lucky and just feed us ideas, and then we could chuck the ideas we don't like and keep the ideas we like? And I realized, especially when I started working with experimental theater and dance people in their companies, that's kind of the way they work. You know, a choreographer will say to her company or his company, oh, do something about going to the beach. And everybody will improvise about going to the beach, and they'll pick and choose. And so there'll be this element of serendipity there. And so Kevin and I started thinking, can we do that with editing? And literally going there and chopping up your footage and throwing it in a timeline is really time-consuming, and that wasn't a very efficient way to work. And it became really obvious that a computer could do it for us in a much faster way and just feed us sort of ideas. Of course, what happens is you do invent this monster, and then you have to contend with it, and then you end up having a sort of battle with it, and sometimes it feeds you wonderful ideas, and sometimes it's really stupid. And so the serendipity machine, the algorithmic noir, is not an edited film. It is being arranged by a computer, and so in some ways, it's a pretty clunky edit. But in other ways, it can be very inspiring. What I have here is a sort of I'm going to try to run a really simple little test for you here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my laptop to the screen. Because what happens is when you see the piece properly installed, there's a big movie screen. We usually install it in a gallery or museum with actual theater seats, so it feels cinematic. But there's also small screens on the side walls. And those small screens play the metadata. They play the code. They play all the keywords that are what the algorithm is using to edit the movie. So I'm going to turn my laptop to the audience. You can kind of see the metadata, and you'll hopefully be able to see the film. And I have no idea what you're going to see exactly, but you'll see something. So I have to set this up. It'll take a second. And it does run a little clunkily on the laptop. It's meant to run on a big tower. But it will kind of approximate the concept. You're also getting to see behind the curtain. Usually the audience doesn't get to see this part, which is normally you walk in and the film is running and you leave and the film is running. But now you're getting to see the guts of the machine to a degree.
Eve, White and White was screened at Sundance in
the spring? It was at Sundance, it was at the Berlinale, which is the Berlin Film Festival, and it was at the Toronto Film Festival last year. Exactly, Toronto just happened, right? It was exactly a year ago. We actually premiered in Toronto and New York the same week. So we went up to Toronto, premiered the piece, and then came down and had the real sort of opening at Christian Trinity Gallery, like the second week of September or something.
Это было число, а за ним тире, что означало, он все еще жив. 1, 9, 7, 8, тире. 1978. Это правда. Он еще не был мертв. Впервые в жизни он задумался над пустотой, следующей после тире. Господин Хольц пытался понять, зачем кто-то хочет назвать его еще не мертвым на распечатанной странице. Он задумался, не план ли это? Он должно быть в игре. Горизонт окружает. Он подумал, ничего не зачаровывает. Он обнаружил, что у этого города нет привлекательных черт. Этому месту присущ свой нумерологический шарм. Но пройдет немало времени, пока он поймет это. Он заходит в 3, 66, 12. Арендованная квартира недалеко от главной улицы, рядом с другими комбинациями из трехкратных чисел. описывающих нахождение в этом городе. Третий микрорайон, 66-й дом, 12-я дверь, 3, 66, 12.
Sometimes he made choices, and sometimes choices were made for him. He'd phone in, and a lady at dispatch would tell him where to go next. Sometimes at night, he'd have dreams about her. Dispatch sitting in front of her computer, all blinking lights and exposed wires. Dispatch reading his orders off a teletype machine. Dispatch rolling dice and randomly choosing his assignment from a codex the size of a telephone book. He'd strain his ears to make out which it was. He could swear he heard the dice. His next step was to get hired by the new method company. Dispatch usually left the details up to him.
Он был молчуном. Говорил, когда это было абсолютно необходимо. Он с детства верил в расчетливость. Предполагал, что человеку по жизни определен лимит слов, который он может использовать. Что ему от природы дана своя порция лексикона.
It normally plays, it edits smoothly like a film when it plays on a tower computer. But what you're seeing there is the movie editing itself live as you're watching it, based on keywords that are embedded in the voiceovers and in the actual film and video clips. So there's about 3,000 film and video clips, there's 80 voiceovers, and there's about 150 pieces of music. And the music is actually chosen at random in between voiceovers, but and the order of voiceovers is chosen at random, but the way that the film is edited to those voiceovers is happening live as you're watching it. And like I say, when you see it on a proper computer, it edits completely smoothly, so it feels like a real edit. It feels cinematic. It doesn't stall as it was doing here.
So Eve, it's never the same film twice.
It's
impossible.
It's the same batch of material.
Right.
And there are these 80 voiceovers, and Maria, who's here, I think has memorized them all because she had to sit. She heard them, but you'll never hear them in the same order, and you'll
Yep.
never see the same edit.
Yep.
And so you'll always see different parts of the story because to watch, if you sat there for 4 hours, you wouldn't hear all of the voiceovers necessarily. And so what bits of the story you get and what pictures you see with that changes at every viewing. And it does just run. So you turn it on and it runs, and when the exhibition place closes, it gets shut down. And so there's no way really of knowing what part of the story you're going to interact with, or how the images are going to line up with the narrative.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about where again, if you're approaching it, you're entering into it, you don't know where you're entering into it, you're never going to enter into that combination, that narrative again. It's going to be shifting again. Talk about the idea of originality, or actually the almost critical underpinnings that kind of push at that, by the same time embrace that, embrace the idea of a new experience, a new narrative being constructed.
I'm really interested in insinuated narrative, mm-hmm. and in the way that the audience brings their own narrative to it. Mm-hmm. And so people come away from, I think, a number of the pieces that Rufus Corporation has made, and that I've made, and that, you know, the pieces I've collaborated on, that where they've created the story. The audience actually is an active collaborator. And what's interesting with this piece is whenever we do a Q&A and people find out there's an algorithm and it runs on keywords or tags, they're like, well, I want to go in and enter the word bird and see all the bird footage. Mm-hmm. And like, they want it to be interactive, right? And, mm-hmm. and I'm like, no, you're the audience. You're passive. It is a movie, kind mm-hmm. of. But your interaction with it is that you're actually inventing the story. We're giving you all of these kind of bits and pieces, these insinuations, but the narrative is being kind of the interaction that you have as the audience is to actually pin it all together. And there is a bit of a narrative there, but there are blanks to be filled in. And the way that everyone fills in those blanks is a little bit different. And I'm really interested in those insinuations, that you're not spoon-fed. It's not television, you know.
Right. Well, I'm curious though about the function of storytelling is almost about being fixed, right? That it does get repeated again and again through eons and different translations. It does evolve and mutate, but there is this kind of core. And there's in both White and White, the Sabine Woman, or even in 89 Minutes. I mean, you frustrate the static point of either a painting or a myth or a kind of storytelling, which I think is really interesting. Yeah. Yeah,
frustrating the static point. I mean, with this piece, I don't know if there really is a static point. With the myth of the Sabine women, there is actually a story mm-hmm, there, mm-hmm, you know. It's mm-hmm. kind of written in the Livy, and it's about these mm-hmm. women that get stolen, and mm-hmm. men come back to avenge the crime, and the women and children put themselves in the middle of the battle. And, you know, and with the Velázquez painting, there is not really a story there. I mean, the painting itself, I think, is a frustrated moment, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the painting is a picture of people in flux. It's asking to be choreographed. Mm-hmm. Everybody's in mid-gesture, so mm-hmm. nobody could have really posed for that painting because everybody's kind of like this, right? Yeah. You had to come from somewhere and go somewhere, and so to me, like, just that image is in itself frustrated, which is interesting. Yeah, I mean, in some ways that frustration is not for everyone. Some people want to have the story laid out on a table. And certainly this story is not laid out on a table. You know, there's a guy in a city who can't really get out, and it's playing around with some sort of sci-fi noir conventions. It's got a little bit of Alphaville thrown in. There were definitely a lot of inspirations in that way. I don't know. Well, and I think also that when you were talking about, how the audience can participate, I think there, the conceit about building around 3 paintings with the 3 works, including a White and White, I think is interesting. But also, it's a lot about how one builds a story. It's not necessarily the story itself, and I think that's what gets revealed in all of those works. Again, with 89 Minutes, it's not only how one builds a painting or how Velázquez was seeing the painting, but kind of building around it. There's something that you're revealing in that process. Yeah, and it's a lot about how. I mean, I work with a great choreographer, Claudio De Serpa, and it's a lot about how gesture implies narrative, mm-hmm. how you build a story through gesture, because both 89 Seconds at Alcazar and Rape of the Sabine Women don't use language, unlike this piece. Right. are implying everything through sound, sound design, music, and gesture, you know, choreography. And often, even gesture that doesn't involve the face. Often it's about, you know, the camera people that I first started working with were kind of coming from this very conventional background and would get really annoyed, like, you're cutting the heads off, you're cutting the heads off. Like, people wouldn't understand anything because we weren't showing their faces. It's like, I still think people might understand something, you know?
Well, and does this go back to some of the earlier work, whether it was the Bronwyn Keenan show or the project you did at the Istanbul Biennial with surveillance cameras?
Right, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and well, actually, speaking of surveillance, I want to get back to some of these collaborative pieces, actually, that Simon and I have done recently, because I've been interested in surveillance for a long time, and I think when people say my work or the Rufus Corporation work is about painting, I say, no, it's not actually, it's about surveillance. And there we go. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to this little presentation. Let's see if we can get that to come back up. 1 second. So, like the surveillance aspect is really important to me. It's true that Michelle brings up my first solo show in New York, surveilled pigeons in a light well, and also implicated the audience in that when people had to go out and sort of view the pigeons on a big tower that I built, and when the audience did that, they were also under surveillance. But so the surveillance of sort of banalities in everyday life is really, I think, endlessly interesting and important. And lots of filmmakers have worked with it. I just saw actually great films by Peter Hutton the other night. If you haven't seen his movies, you should definitely go see them. They were so beautiful, and there's no sound. And so it's very inspiring to sit through an hour film with no sound. It's a totally different experience. This piece actually is a collaboration with someone named Angela Christlieb, a filmmaker in Berlin that I work with a lot. She, together with Simon and Sergei Franklin, a number of other people, shot white on white with me, mostly in Central Asia, but we also shot in Azerbaijan, we shot in Dubai, we shot some in New York. So we were in a number of different places. During the creation of that film, we took a 72-hour train ride from the Caspian Sea to the eastern edge of Kazakhstan near the Chinese border to Almaty, the main city. And this is a 3-screen piece that she and I collaborated on, in which she was filming on the train. And you're looking north and south simultaneously. So unfortunately, I don't have a running version of this, and it's hard in this light to see what's going on. But you're seeing 3 screens, so the first 2 pictures, second 2 pictures, third 2 pictures. The piece is called How to Tell the Future from the Past, which is the title I've used a number of times. I really like that title. And there was something about moving forward into the future, or just moving forward on the train, and then looking out at what felt like stuff that could have been there for hundreds of years. It just, out in this world that didn't seem necessarily that changed, and that was becoming the past as we drove by it. And so you're seeing out a train window, but you're also seeing a mirror, so that's how you're seeing north and south simultaneously. This is just another still from those 3 screens. But it uses these ideas of surveillance and just this sort of very simple, in a way you could say passive documentation of everyday life, to try to make a point about our place in it. And there's points where the piece becomes very abstract, almost like color field painting. And then there's points where it's, documenting sort of the farmland or the industry or whatever is going on outside the window. But I like very much that you're passing things and moving forward and seeing north and south at the same time. And then, as I said, Simon and I have been collaborating quite a bit. And so after we shot White on White, which Simon also worked on as a still photographer and shot some of the film footage for that, we got invited to Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan to do a little teaching thing by the State Department. It's U.S. propaganda, if you've ever heard of it. You know, we got paid to go teach some young artists, and that was very interesting. While we were there, we thought, oh, we have to make a piece, and I'd been really taken with the architecture in these ex-Soviet countries, and Simon was also really excited about it. And what we saw in Bishkek was different than what we saw anywhere else, in that it was this mix of Soviet and Oriental, and this Orientalist idea that was really different. And it was so strange, in that it was this prefab concrete stuff where you'd see blocks and blocks of buildings that were kind of the same, and then suddenly there would be a new design, and you'd see blocks and blocks of those buildings. And then you'd turn a corner, and there'd be another design, and there'd be blocks and blocks of those. And they were all this, you know, social housing. And there was something about them that was quite enticing. We also lived in a lot of these apartments during the creation of White on White, because we went, over 2.5 years, we went 5 times to Central Asia, and every time we'd rent apartments in these different cities. And so you learn a lot about the whole idea of social housing and Soviet architecture, and there's a kind of very practical efficiency to it. And so I started to find these buildings that at first you think are kind of ugly, very inspiring. And so Simon and I created in one day. We went all over Bishkek, and we rented a cherry picker, pouring rain, and we shot as many of these balconies as we could. And then created almost this Frankenstein architecture. This is a video piece. I'm just showing some stills of it. But it's continually morphing. And so this sort of weird Frankenstein cobbled together building continually changes with one shape morphing into the next, to the next, to the next. And so it has this kind of uncanny quality that's kind of funny and I think quite magical. There's a sort of a related piece called Winter Garden that's up here in the fair in Kristen Tierney's booth, if you folks want to check that out. And then another collaboration Simon and I did, since we started going into the whole sort of rear window thing of staring in people's windows. We were in Berlin, actually, for the Berlin Film Festival last year. And we're staying in an apartment of some friends of ours, and I don't know if you know the architecture there. We're both really inspired by architecture. I think about architecture a lot. And Simon and I have also worked on buildings a lot. That's part of the way we've supported ourselves, is renovating buildings. And so we were in Berlin, the buildings are built around a central Hof, around a courtyard. And so often you can see, if the Hof is not too big, you can see across. And so we started noticing the life that was going on across, much the way we noticed the life on the balconies in Bishkek. This apartment we stayed with was a girl who lived across the way, and eventually we got her permission. It was not all done illicitly. And it's a piece called Waiting for an Icon. It's also here in the fair at Hancha Venison Gallery. And she had actually covered her window with this frosted stuff and just left a circle. And so every now and then she appears as an icon. And so then there was also this nice relationship back to painting. And it's also quite magical because it used, again, the sort of banality of everyday life that I think Simon and I are both really interested in that this is just her in her kitchen. There's another piece that Simon and I created during that same period called Seitenflügel, which means side wing. And that's also up at Kristen Tierney Gallery at the fair, so you folks can check that out. And then I want to talk a little about co-production. Because as well as Simon and I doing our own work and collaborating more recently, we've started a little theater in our lofts in Brooklyn. The theater kind of migrates. Sometimes it's in my studio, sometimes it's in Simon's studio. And it's called the Wallabout Oyster Theater. And we've really done it as a platform. We started it as a platform to co-produce for some of the actors that we work with. And so what you see over there, this doesn't seem all that focused, but what you see over there is we inherited a bunch of theater seats, and lo and behold, when you have theater seats, suddenly you realize you have a theater. And so there are the theater seats. We actually can squeeze in about 40 people, sometimes 45 people a night if we see people on the floor. And that was what you see on the top, what is that, top right? Is that the right? Yeah. That is a set for Huey. We did Eugene O'Neill's Huey with Jeff Wood again, who you saw in White on White, and a great actor named Nesbitt Blaisdell. And that was a production of Krapp's Last Tape that Nesbitt did. That was the first production we did in the theater. And so running a little theater has been a sort of a new thing for us. It just kind of happened out of the blue very organically. kind of like everything we do, very organically. But it's been quite exciting. And as I said, we really co-produced there, or produced, and we have yet to do sort of original pieces there, or neither of us has tried to direct there. But we really got into giving away this platform to some other artists, or actors in this case. And then we got into co-producing in a different way, in that we produced for these two older folks who have a really interesting background. And we recently produced a film for them, Jack and Lee Ruby. And Jack and Lee have a really interesting background in that they were in jail for 10 years, more, 12, I think, in Australia. They got known for insurance fraud, and that's what they got done for, got sent to jail. They became very good at creating portfolios of false evidence. They created these portfolios to sort of, for clients that had assets that they didn't want to liquidate, but needed the money from. So those assets would somehow miraculously disappear or get damaged, or things would happen, and an insurance claim would be made. They made these quite extensive portfolios, often using film, video, photography, documentation, you know, all kinds of letters and documents. When they finally got busted in the late 90s and went to jail, they were living in Australia. They were actually originally American, but had lived in Australia a long time. We got to know them through their lawyer, and we started corresponding with them a couple of years ago. What we started realizing is that some of their evidence that they created still existed. And one of the pieces of evidence they had was this. And it was part of a portfolio that they had made for one of their clients. The original film piece disappeared, but they talked to us about recreating it. And so about a little over a month ago, we actually produced this film, Car Wash Incidents, that Jack and Lee Ruby directed. And what I'm going to do now is just show you a teaser of that project, because it's a whole different type of collaboration that Simon and I are involved in now, that's not necessarily about even, you know, us being the makers directly, but getting behind something and sort of helping launch the career of two other people who are emerging artists in their mid-60s.
Eve, they acknowledge themselves as artists?
What?
They acknowledge themselves as artists?
They do now.
Uh-huh.
It's, I mean, they kind of clocked to it that the stuff they had been making, you know, 15 and 20 and 25 years ago actually looks like things that people are calling art.
So they were creating fictions.
They were creating fiction, absolutely. They were creating portfolios of false evidence and whatever needed to be done for those portfolios. So let me show you the teaser, and then
Hey, hang on that place. Bag?
the open end.
You have the bag?
Yeah.
Which
I
bag?
think that was there now.
So you don't know that bag?
No, never been here
Supposed to give it to me. Which bag are you talking about?
That was this morning. I had a hard day at work. I
the bag
really don't feel like doing it.
to the girl in the red shirt.
Something easy then. How about
Someone
BLT?
told me to give it to the girl in the red shirt.
I do. I've got
They just told me to get rid of the bag.
Where's the sack? Don't look at that guy. Look at me, Mom. Look at me. Yes, that bag.
Okay. All right.
Red shirt.
Do I look like a red shirt?
All right.
Do I look like a girl with a red shirt?
It did.
Yeah. Right here?
Gotta get out of here. The name was on top and it blew over.
Right here?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. 'Cause I was trying to meet someone here, and I thought this is good. Okay.
Yeah. No problem. You shouldn't be lost.
I'm on my way to meet a friend. I'll see you.
You don't happen to have a bag on you. Sure. Sorry.
Here?
No, thank you.
Coming soon? Right here?
Sorry to keep you waiting.
It's all right. I gotta go. I've gotta go to the grocery store. My son says to give this to you. Here.
Yeah?
Yeah, that's all.
You know what it is?
No. You? I don't. All right.
Did you give it to her?
Yeah, I did.
Did she say anything to you?
I forget. I don't think she said anything to me, but if she said something to me, it was
Mom, get in. Nothing important, Mom?
nothing
Did
important.
she say something?
Yeah, I gave it to her.
Did she say anything?
She said,
Did she give her?
she asked me if I knew what was on his card.
Did she say anything? I heard you talking. Did she say anything?
I thought you were kind of nervous. I said, "How are you so nervous?"
You don't look inside. You don't have to worry about anything. I just want to make sure
Well,
that
you
you
know,
got rid of
when
that
you're
bag.
nervous, I get nervous.
You don't have to be nervous. Hey, wait, fine.
It doesn't take anything to make me nervous, so you should know better. I don't need this aggravation. It's hot out.
What?
Watch out! You almost hit that guy.
You know that guy?
I don't know him. No. That guy over there. Almost hit him.
Yeah, he does.
I think
Well,
you.
do you know if she
I think
said
there's
she was
something
leaving?
wrong.
She's pretty wrong.
Leaving? What do you mean leaving?
Did that girl tell you she was going to leave?
Well, she did leave. She left. I gave her the bag and she left. All right.
But she's still
Are we
right
going
there.
to the grocery store
that's
or not?
Mom.
I think we'll feel a lot better. There's air conditioning in the grocery store.
She's...
I know.
It's too hot.
Hey, Mom.
We need to get a
She
tune-up.
seems to be waiting. Maybe she doesn't know. Maybe we should get that bag back. Go get the bag back from her.
All right.
Maybe you should just get rid of it.
I think next time I'm going to drive.
Mom, just get rid of the bag. Make sure you throw it away. I don't want to see it.
It's vaguely familiar. Do you know it?
Let's sit around.
I was waiting for you.
Yeah, I know.
Get that bag. Mom, just go get the bag back from her and get rid of it.
All right.
Don't
then
ask
we're-
questions.
All right.
Just go get rid of it. I'll be back to get you. Okay.
Miss? So now he wants me to take the bag back. Yeah, you sure? That's what he says.
Hey.
You're going to be getting in and out of the car.
Yeah, mate. Okay. I am fucking bag.
I'm a better driver than you are. Yeah, I am. Oh, man.
Wait. In the bag?
Hello? Billy, what's going on?
Dwight,
You got about the bag?
bag are you talking about?
You know that bag? You don't know that bag. The bag's not there.
Well, there's a bag, but someone told me to give it to that girl in the red shirt.
Okay.
Again.
There was a girl in a red shirt, and
Don't do that.
Yeah, well, it's
No, but
easy
like,
on a
don't
hot
do it.
night like this. All I have to do is
The guy with the
heat up
jacket
the
on.
frying pan for the bacon,
You doing, Russell?
put the mayonnaise.
dark jacket, and then he said, just give it to the girl in the red shirt.
Oh.
So I got rid of it.
Oh, I don't know. I'd rather just go home and take a shower.
I don't know, I just saw her leave. I don't know where she went.
Why
I
are we
really don't know where she
stopped?
Where are you going?
went. I just want to get my car washed.
Yeah, $100.
Really all I want to do is get my car washed. I'm really sorry. I don't know what's wrong.
Hustler boots?
I think that would do a favor for me.
Yeah.
Run an errand for a guy. I want to get out of the car. This bag.
I gotta get out of here. What bag?
All right.
Swing around the block and pick it up.
Okay.
Grocery, okay?
All right, yeah. Hurry up.
What bag?
Bag you're here for? Bag I'm here for?
Oh, you mean that bag?
That's the bag I mean.
Well, some guy told me to give it to a girl in a red shirt.
Sure.
Yeah, girl in a red shirt. That's what he said.
Any questions?
Yes. Talk a little bit more about authorship. So it's interesting. So this is a collaboration between you and Simon. Is that right?
Well,
Or
this
you're
is a
working-
collaboration. This is Jack and Lee Ruby's direction, but we produced it. So we collaborated as producers.
Right, but I'm wondering if you could extend that to both this couple as almost being found, the way found photographs start to stimulate projects.
Well, that's interesting because Simon has collected photographs for a long time. He has a huge collection of found photographs, and finding Jack and Lee was a lot like that in a way. It has a really nice relationship to finding photographs. And so, yeah, finding them was sort of like an eye-opener. I mean, they had been incarcerated for quite a few years. We met a friend of ours, his brother-in-law is their lawyer, in Australia. And so we started corresponding with the lawyer, and then he sort of got us in touch with them. And they were just these two really inspiring characters. I mean, you know, they were white-collar criminals. They paid their debt to society, and I think that at some point, it seemed to us, and I think it dawned on them too, that they actually had been for a long time and could reconceive of what they were doing as art. Yep. And so it just made sense that we should facilitate that.
Right.
And that's what we did.
Right. In terms of Rufus Corporation, I mean, there is a lot of confounding of authorship.
Yeah, I mean, this is not a Rufus Corporation project.
Right,
this
right.
is Simon and I as producers and Jack and Lee as directors. But certainly, yeah, the confounding of authorship, I think, is something that I'm interested in. I think it's, or just the idea of acknowledging that authorship is often not what we think it is. Like, I mean, in the sort of, there's a sort of industry behind, you know, bringing up the idea of the sort of singular genius, right? Yep. I mean, like, you know, the literary world is all about that. You know, the novel is written by the guy alone in his room who's the singular, or woman alone in her room, whatever, and who's the singular genius. You know, and it actually doesn't acknowledge often that editors do a lot of work. Mm-hmm. You know, mm-hmm. I mean, there are plenty of authors who will actually come out and admit, well, they had a lot of help from their editor. You know, and so authorship, I think, is, you know, even when, I'm not saying those singular geniuses don't exist. I think they probably do. But I'm not one of them. And I think that, you know, in the case, I don't think Jack and Lee are one of them. I think, you know, we helped them, we facilitated them, we produced them. They hadn't made anything in 15 years. And what they had made before were portfolios of false evidence. They weren't exactly artworks. But they did start to reconsider their work with a new appreciation, understanding that some of what they had done 15, 20, 25 years ago could be looked at with a new aesthetic appreciation, with a new light and rethought. But yeah, confounding authorship, or just understanding that authorship isn't everything that it needs to be. I mean, even the whole thing about, you know, Jack and Lee being emerging artists in their mid-60s, not everybody has to be young, single, and sexy. You don't have to be 20 years old to be a superstar, or to be good at something, and that, you know, that comes from the sort of influx of like Hollywood values that tends to like influence everything else in every other type of artistic practice, right?
Well, that's right. And I think about marketing or
advertising.
You know, how do you, you know, the supply, demand, exhibition, display. I mean, how do you push? I mean, when you start confounding authorship, that makes it harder. I mean, when you think about, you know, the singular author artist. I mean, it's easier to move that through systems of capital than it is.
Exactly. And that's the whole thing that Rufus Corporation is about, confounding, and you know that, and that. I mean, how do I put it? Well, I guess it's probably that especially if you're making film video work, most of these people who are making cinematic type of film video pieces, I mean, there are the solo artists, like going and seeing, for instance, these Peter Hutton films last week in New York. He sits there alone with his movie camera, with nobody else, and makes his movies, and edits them alone in his room with an old-fashioned, you know, analog film editor. But very few people who work cinematic video art these days work alone. They don't. And so, you know, as much as you look at those like big names in video art, they're not making that work by themselves. And so the idea, it's not just about confounding it, it's also about actually trying to acknowledge that something else is going on. There's a whole group of people behind things that make stuff happen in a way. And actually, this is where in the real like movie world, right, things are a little differently. Their credit is super important, right? In the traditional feature film movie structure, whether it's independent film or Hollywood or whatever, credit is super important. There's a reason that there's 1,000 names at the end of a movie, because giving credit properly is very, very important. In the art world, people tend to be a little suspicious of that. Right. I mean, I've had to have fights with museum curators about putting the names on the wall of everyone who worked on a piece. And it's like, because they don't want to put 100 names on a wall. I was like, well, then you can't show the piece.
Yeah, well, it's consumption and audience, right? They're very different.
Yeah. And so Rufus Corporation was about acknowledging that, but also about giving credit, also about, you know, trying to make make ourselves different from, but also show the allegiances with, you know, theater and dance and film. And, you know, we use a lot of those technologies now, right? And so those come with a lot of people attached. But I do think that, yeah, confounding authorship, it's not looked upon nicely by the people who want to package things. Right. It doesn't make marketing easy. So you have to sometimes be creative about it.
I have one more question before others can pop in. And that is, as you reconfigure platform, authorship, corporation, individual work, how do ideas evolve with that? I mean, there are, in terms of, the couple, the found couple, and working with Simon on this. I mean, I'm just curious about the arc of ideas, imagination, and how you tether those onto the different structures of work and collaboration.
I mean, for me personally, I feel like I've worked that way for a long time. I mean, when you are traveling on a train across Central Asia with 5 other people, or 4, in that case we were 5 of us total, for 4 other people, everyone had ideas. It was Angela who said, let's put the camera out the window and film in the mirror at the same time, and so everyone is putting in ideas, and it's about being open to it, and that does, for me anyway, it comes from a background of having worked with, other people who worked in companies. And when you work in these companies, lots of people throw out ideas. And you hope that the good ones rise to the top. I don't think it's that complicated, really.
Well, and that was even embedded in 89 Seconds, right? I mean, we were letting some of the actors, it wasn't just the painting and you directing.
No. I mean, those guys each came up with their own kind of body language and their own kind of inner monologue about who they were and what they were doing. And, certainly Claudia, our choreographer, had some specific movement or trajectories that she wanted them to make, but actors do. They develop their own backstory and their own internal psychology and monologue about what they're doing and why they're doing it, even if they're not speaking. And I remember once Nesbitt Blaisdell, who's one of the actors that we're working with in our theater and who has been in 89 Seconds and was in Rape of the Sabine Women, and he's 87 years old now, and he was up on a Q&A with us once, and somebody said, what's it like to be up there and not be able to speak? And he just looked at the audience. He's like, you spend 90% of your life not speaking. You don't have to talk all the time. It's possible to communicate without speaking. And so, an actor's job isn't only with their face and what's coming out of their mouth. And that was really important for them to get into that place. And for me, when I was casting 89 Seconds anyway, to find people who understood, how to walk across a room. Walking across a room in a way that communicates something is not necessarily that easy.
I'm going to be greedy since I'm up here. One more question in terms of artifacts and using systems like the contemporary art apparatus to sell things, the artifacts from these things, right? Is that it's kind of an exchange to some degree, or a funding source, a direct funding source? It goes back into it. I mean, how does that work out?
Oh, it's different all the time. It is a funding source. And certainly, the artifacts, with all of these larger projects, there have been smaller artifacts. There have been these flat screen works and photographs. And it's made some of this work possible, right? That it would not have been possible without the art market. Certainly, between 89 Seconds and the Rape of the Sabine Women would not have been possible without the art market. It was made with money that came from either pre-selling or selling, works, or whether it was large works or smaller works that were related to the larger works. The other thing, though, what the artifacts allow you to do is if you're making cinematic type work, and you are, when people go out and make things that are kind of like movies, you shoot maybe you shoot 100 hours of footage, maybe you shoot 200, right? Well, if you make something that's kind of like a feature film, you're going to throw away 98 or 99 hours of that material. That's kind of dumb, right? So, part of the reason White on White works is because it uses 30 hours of footage, right? So we didn't have to throw away, 90% of our material. We threw away still 50 or 60% of the material, but we didn't throw away 90% of the material. And so that was like so heartening to me. It's like, we haven't wasted our time, you know, shooting all this stuff. When people talk about stuff ending up on the cutting room floor, you know, you're like, a lot of it is beautiful and useful, but it's not useful in your typical narrative cinematic way. Some of it can live on a wall, kind of the way a painting lives on a wall, but you'd never look at it in a narrative feature film movie theater context. That doesn't mean it can't have a life and have an artistic statement. It's just much slower, and it just needs to just be there, and you just need to exist with it. And so having these artifacts that Michelle brings up is about also being able to take advantage of the fact that you shot some really great stuff, and you can put it out there in the world, and some of it can have a different kind of life. And so some of it can have a life as a video art piece or flat screen work that can live in a collector's home. And some of it are these bigger installation pieces that really require sort of an institution or maybe a movie theater. And so there's different types of looking, and that different type of looking can allow different types of pieces, and some of those pieces are more conducive to being sold on the art market. You know, and so, you know, here we are at an art fair, which is a really conflicted place to be. But
not totally incongruent.
What?
But not totally incongruent in terms of how you think
but
about
not
the relationship.
totally.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
no, it's not. And I think that in some ways, you know, it was interesting because part of what funded White on White was a foundation called Creative Capital, which is a great foundation. But it was so interesting to go to Creative Capital where you had all these independent filmmakers and all these visual artists, and a lot of the visual artists also work in film and video. And everybody thought the grass was greener, right? All the filmmakers wanted to be in the art world. All the people in the art world wanted to be in the film world. And they all thought the grass was greener on the other side. And it was like neither of them knew the half of it. You know, the filmmakers go through hell and you spend years raising money for their movies. And the artists, for the most part, aren't trying to raise, you know, $5 million. And tend to be able to, often can work a little more fluidly, at least in my experience. But we can't raise $5 million, you know, not usually. Not unless you're like Miranda July and you can make that jump or something. But so there's a place for it all. And in some ways, we should be lucky now that in this day and age, there is an art market that's interested in cinematic film and video work. And some people in that world will support it and understand it, and some people even want to live with it. And so, I don't know, the model kind of works, maybe, sometimes.
Questions? Does anybody have questions for Eve? Yeah.
About the installations themselves, and you talked about the theater seats. About the, not the theater seats in your actual theater, but the cinema seats, so that people could view White on White in a cinematic experience. And I'm wondering if there are other artists that you look at that inspire you to approach installing the videos in new ways for the audience.
I'm always, is there more to the question? Or?
No, I think that's it.
I mean, I'm always interested in how people are installing, you know, motion picture work. And in some ways, I feel like my approach so far has been pretty conventional. And I'm always wondering if you can, you know, burst the bubble more about installing. Simon and I actually did a collaboration with a musician up at MPAC where we played around with a circular screen, a 360-degree screen, with all of some footage of his that worked really well on that round screen. But I'm really interested in different ways that you can install video, and if you can, you know, make things visible from both sides, and you know, what happens when you expand. And, you know, I used to do more 3-screen pieces. But, you know, for instance, with White on White, it's still a pretty conventional installation, except that I think that if you're going to be asked to watch long-form video, you should be comfortable. And sometimes you can be comfortable sitting on the floor, but some people aren't. And with that, there is this whole idea of playing with the idea of what is a movie. And so if you're going to ask what is a movie, and you're going to present something that plays with cinematic convention, part of the cinematic convention is the architecture of the cinema space, right? And so we're absolutely playing with the idea of cinematic convention. We're presenting something that kind of looks and feels like a film, but it's being edited live as you watch it by computer. You're made aware of the presence of the computer in that room, but you're also made aware of the cinematic convention of it, and part of that is to give you certain accoutrements of the cinema space, which are the seats and the risers and good sound and a big projection. You know, normally it's on a 20-foot screen, and so it's all of that is really. I think it's really important to also just the way you sound attenuate the space, so that you walk in and you feel like if the space is properly sound attenuated, your body changes completely and your whole ability to concentrate changes completely. And so that you calm down and you don't, like there isn't that sense of urgency of, oh no, like, am I going to understand or what's going to happen? And if you sound attenuate a space, possibly, I think you get rid of a lot of the anxiety in the audience. And so if you sound attenuate the space correctly. And so that's becoming more and more important to me, as important as the projection, the idea of how you're dealing with the audio in the space.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Your serendipity machine with the random patterns, when you're playing that, does it get saved as a piece?
It's a really good question. We actually, Jeff built a version of the algorithm. I mean, it's not exactly random patterns. The edits are algorithmic. So that's why when you see, for instance, he's talking about dice, a picture with dice came up on the screen, right? So dice, obviously the keyword there was dice, and it's going to look for an image that has dice in it or has something to do with dice. And so, but yeah, do the edits get saved? Jeff Garneau, the programmer, wrote a version of the algorithm that can save what's called an XML file, which is the file that Final Cut edits in.
So you could play it again.
Well, there's a but. The but is that the version that creates an XML file is not the version I'm running. There were, like when, the version that creates the XML file never ran as smoothly as the version we're actually running here.
Okay.
And what we're running here didn't run smoothly. But when you see it properly installed on a big computer, it runs absolutely, the edits are absolutely clean. And it's really important that it has that cinematic feel. And so, technically, of course, it's possible to save the edit and go back. But and I saved it, and I thought, oh, this is
the edit.
Well, to save the computer's edit, right? The computer makes an edit, you know.
So that you could I'm thinking like a cassette tape. You pull it out or a DVD, and then I can put that in and play it again later.
No, we've talked about it a lot, and we have the technical capability to do it. And actually, we even talked about having the serendipity machine create monoprints, right? And so that every hour we'd start the machine and stop it, and that would be one. You burn the DVD, that would be one monoprint, and then you'd start it and stop it again, that would be a different monoprint, and there'd be thousands of monoprints of this film, and nobody would have the same one. So it's absolutely. We have a version that'll do it, and we've talked about it, and now I feel very strongly about not doing it. And the reason I feel really strongly about not doing it is because what I felt like I'd noticed when we had when we had saved the edit. And I went back and looked at it, is it actually felt like a bad edit. It didn't feel bad, it felt like a mediocre edit. It didn't feel edited in a way that I felt like you needed to watch again. Every now and then you'd see some really great juxtapositions that you wished you could remember or you wished you could save, but I feel like that's like real life, right? Like when you walk around the corner and you see something incredible or you see a stunning person or an amazing sunset or you have this incredible experience and you walk past it and it's gone. And that's the way life is. It's gone. And the fact that it's transient and it's gone has become important to me. And as soon as we got the idea, well, we can save these serendipitous edits and then we can make these monoprints and then we can make thousands of DVDs of this movie that are all different. But I realized they're actually machine generated and they're not great edits. They're mediocre edits. Every now and then they're great, but often they're just not that good. And I didn't want this thing out there archived in a way that felt not that good. The experience of going through it is good. Just like, you can walk from your house to your job or whatever, and it feels the same every day, but what you see is different, and there's one day where you see something quite incredible, and you won't see it again the next day. And that transience and that serendipitousness of it became, to me, what was important. And so trying to archive that and hold on to it started to seem almost antithetical. It started to seem not just beside the point, but not what should be happening. So I also thought if I see something really good, I should be able to remember it. And so it started to also bring up questions of what we can remember and what we can't.
You speak really well. Thank you. I have one other thing. About a print, do you have like a website or something? I really like that photograph of the Russian architecture, you know, the juxtaposition.
Oh, that's a video.
And that's a video?
That Simon and I made.
And you
I don't
have a
think
website or
we,
something
well, we have
where
it
we
on
can look at
his
these?
Vimeo page. We don't have a print of it. We never made prints of it. It's a video. It's a moving it's a moving image piece. That piece is actually moving.
Okay.
But it doesn't exist as a photo.
Still.
And like I said, Simon has a link to a Vimeo page that you could watch the clip on, but it's a 30-second clip, and it's not just this big. But it doesn't exist.
I could freeze it, right, and make a
what?
print. Couldn't I freeze that video on my computer and make a print?
It would be this big. I mean, it wouldn't be very big.
Well, you know, it's just the idea. I like some of the designs on it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the way they had the concrete.
Well, we haven't thought about editing that as a still. We can talk about it.
Further on there. Next.
Right.
I think we're good.
End of
I
our
think
time.
we're very good. White and White next week at
San Francisco. White on White will be for 4 days, playing at SF MoMA. And after that is a big show of White on White and a series of photographs that Simon made called When the Future Throws a Shadow Over the Land, which he shot while we were shooting White on White. There's a big show in Montreal happening in 2013. And it's also, White on White's also going to Texas. I think we're going to Texas in November.
Any production coming up in your theater?
We don't know. We were just reading a script, actually. First talking about if we should do more original scripts. It's also about that our theater is actually very much supported by things like this. Like if we sell art, we can afford to do the theater because the theater is absolutely a losing proposition. So we have to feel rich enough to do it.
Eve, thank you.
Yeah.